Welcome to Story Planet, where we bring you relaxing and heartwarming tales to help you unwind. Tonight's story is The Harvest of Serenity, a cozy bedtime novel set in a peaceful 17th-century English village. Join Anna and her neighbors as they rebuild their storm-torn countryside, finding strength, hope, and unity along the way. So settle in, get cozy, and let the soothing rhythms of this tale carry you into a world of resilience and renewal. Now let's begin. The storm's aftermath. The storm had come in the darkest hours, howling winds ripping through the quiet countryside like a wild beast unleashed. Rain fell in relentless sheets, drenching the land and battering fragile rooftops. By dawn, it was gone, leaving behind a landscape that was both eerily quiet and profoundly changed. Broken branches littered the fields, fences lay in splinters, and the once golden fields were now a patchwork of mud and debris. Anna stood at the edge of her farm, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. She surveyed the scene with a heavy heart. The barn, once sturdy and red as a robin's chest, was missing half its roof. Her vegetable garden, her pride and joy, was little more than a tangle of uprooted plants. The wheat fields, which had shimmered like liquid gold just days before, now lay flattened and sodden. The quietness of the morning was almost unbearable. The birds, usually so vocal at dawn, were silent, as though mourning the destruction. But Anna knew the land, just as she knew herself. Both had weathered storms before and would do so again. She took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill her lungs. The scent of wet earth, bittersweet and grounding, reminded her that life was still here, beneath the surface. The seeds that had been scattered might still grow. The trees, though battered, still stood tall, and so would she. Hearthwick was a small, tightly knit village tucked into the rolling hills of the English countryside. Its thatched cottages, cobblestone streets, and sprawling fields of wheat and barley made it a picturesque home for the farmers, artisans, and traders who lived there. At its heart was the village square, a lively gathering place where festivals were held and goods exchanged. A well-worn path led from the square to Anna's farm, winding through fields and pastures that had always brimmed with life, until now. The storm had left its mark on every corner of the village. The once bright awnings of the market stalls now hung in tatters, and the stone bridge that spanned the creek was partially submerged. Smoke curled lazily from a few chimneys, a sign that some homes had survived intact, but others had not been as lucky. Despite the destruction, the villagers were already stirring, their resolve as sturdy as the oaks that dotted the hills. Anna walked the familiar path from her farm to the village square, her steps slow as she took in the scene. Clara, a young widow who lived on the edge of the village, approached Anna with a basket of bruised apples and a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. "Morning, Anna," Clara said, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. "I suppose we've all seen better days." Anna nodded, her gaze moving to the small offering. It wasn't much, but Clara's gesture was a reminder of the village's spirit. "Thank you," Anna said softly. "You're kind to think of me, but I should be asking what you need." Clara smiled faintly, the weariness in her eyes softened by Anna's words. "We'll manage," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "We always do." By mid-morning, the villagers began gathering in the square. Edward, the village's elder craftsman, leaned on his cane as he addressed the crowd. His presence was steadying, his voice calm despite the weight of the task ahead. "We've faced worse," Edward said, his words carrying easily over the group. The fields will grow again, the houses will be mended, and the market will return. But we must work together. Alone, this task is too great." The villagers murmured in agreement, and for the first time since the storm, a glimmer of hope flickered in their faces. Anna stepped forward, her voice strong though her heart still felt heavy. "Edward is right," she said. "We can rebuild, one step at a time. My farm is in shambles, but I'll start today. If anyone needs help, I'll do what I can." Her words sparked something in the crowd. One by one, others offered their support. Clara volunteered to mend clothing. Samuel, a traveling merchant caught in the storm, pledged to share his supplies. Even the children, wide-eyed and unsure, promised to gather wood and fetch water. That evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Anna returned to her farm. The quiet was less oppressive now, filled with the promise of hard work and renewal. She stood at the edge of her fields, her shadow stretching long and thin over the earth. Kneeling, she ran her fingers through the damp soil, feeling its coolness against her skin. The land, though battered, still held its strength. The seeds buried beneath the surface would rise again, just as they always had. The first stars appeared in the sky, their faint light a gentle reminder of resilience. As Anna rose and looked out over her broken farm, she felt a quiet resolve take root in her heart. The harvest might be months away, but she would see it through. One step at a time, she would rebuild, not just her farm, but the spirit of her village. The storm had taken much, but it had not taken everything. There was still hope, and for Anna, that was enough. Seeds of resilience. The days that followed the storm were filled with an unspoken urgency, as though the land itself was waiting to be healed. Hearthwick's villagers moved with quiet determination, their routines now centered around mending what had been broken. The air buzzed with the sound of hammers striking nails, saws cutting through timber, and voices calling out for help or supplies. Though the storm had left devastation, it had also awakened a collective strength among the people. Anna rose early each morning, just as the first blush of dawn painted the sky. Her farmhouse still bore the scars of the storm, a roof with gaping holes and walls that creaked with weariness. But it was the fields that called to her first. Armed with a rake and a determined spirit, she began clearing debris from the sodden earth. Every broken branch and tangled weed removed felt like lifting a weight off her heart. Her hands, calloused from years of farming, worked steadily through the morning. By midday, sweat glistened on her brow, and her arms ached from the effort. But as she stood and surveyed the patch of cleared soil, she felt a flicker of hope. Beneath the mud and debris, the soil still carried the scent of life, rich and earthy. She knelt and pressed her hand into the damp ground, feeling its coolness seep into her skin. "You'll grow again," she murmured softly, as though speaking to an old friend. Later that day, Edward arrived at Anna's farm, carrying a bundle of tools. His weathered face bore a faint smile as he approached. "I thought you might need a little help," he said, holding out a hammer and some wooden planks. Anna smiled back, grateful for the company. "I could use a hand with the barn roof. It's taken quite the beating." Together, they worked in companionable silence, the rhythmic sound of nails being driven into wood punctuating the warm afternoon. Edward moved slower than he once had, his hands less steady, but his skill remained sharp. As they worked, he spoke of his younger days, of the many storms he had weathered in Hearthwick, and how each time the village had found a way to rebuild. "The land always finds its way back," Edward said. his voice steady and reassuring. "And so do we. It's in our nature to endure." Anna nodded, his words settling in her heart like seeds in fertile soil. By evening, they had patched a portion of the roof, enough to keep the barn's interior dry should another rain come. Anna offered Edward a cup of tea, and they sat on the farmhouse porch, watching the sun dip below the hills. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and the village below seemed to glow in the fading light. "You're doing good work here, Anna," Edward said, his gaze thoughtful. "The farm, the way you've rallied the village, it matters." Anna's cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked down at her hands, still streaked with dirt. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," she said quietly. Edward chuckled softly. "Sometimes that's all it takes to inspire others. You've a strength in you, Anna, whether you see it or not." The next day, Clara arrived at the farm with her 2 young children, their arms laden with baskets of seeds. "The ones in my garden made it through the storm," she explained, setting the baskets down. "I thought we could plant them here to start fresh." Anna's heart swelled at the gesture. Together, they worked side by side, planting row after row of seeds in the freshly cleared soil. The children's laughter filled the air as they darted between the rows, their small hands eager to help. The sight of tiny hands pressing seeds into the earth brought a smile to Anna's face. As the sun climbed higher, Samuel, the traveling merchant, arrived with a cart full of supplies. He handed Anna a sack of grain and a bundle of saplings. "Thought you could use these," he said with a grin. "Consider it a trade for a warm meal the next time I pass through." Anna laughed, the sound light and genuine. "You've got yourself a deal, Samuel." By the end of the week, the fields began to take on a new shape. Freshly tilled rows stretched out under the sun, dotted with newly planted seeds and saplings. The barn roof, though still incomplete, no longer gaped open to the sky. The farmhouse walls had been reinforced, and the garden, once a tangle of destruction, showed the first signs of revival. As Anna stood at the edge of her fields, the soft evening breeze rustling through the newly planted rows, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The work was far from over, but the land was beginning to heal, and so was she. That night, as she lay in bed, the rhythmic chirping of crickets filled the air. Her muscles ached from the day's labor, but her heart was light. Closing her eyes, she pictured the fields in full bloom, golden wheat swaying under a summer sun, and the laughter of villagers during harvest. The vision was enough to carry her into a peaceful sleep, the promise of better days ahead resting gently in her dreams. The village unites. The morning sun rose gently over Hearthwick, casting a golden light across the village square. The air smelled of fresh earth and wood, mingling with the faint aroma of bread baking in the few ovens that had survived the storm. The sounds of hammers, saws, and laughter wove together in a melody of rebuilding as the villagers embraced the rhythm of renewal. Anna arrived early, her apron already dusted with soil and her hands calloused from the week's labor. She carried a bundle of fresh herbs from her garden, which she hoped to trade for nails and tools to continue the repairs on her barn. The square was bustling with life. Villagers haggled over salvaged goods, shared stories of their progress, and lent hands to those in need. Near the center of the square, Edward stood by a makeshift workbench, surrounded by a group of villagers. He was showing them how to mend broken carts and tools, his steady hands working with practiced ease. Anna approached, and Edward looked up with a nod of greeting. "Anna," he said, his voice warm, "how's the farm coming along?" "It's getting there," she replied, her tone tinged with pride. "Thanks to the seeds Clara brought and Samuel's supplies, the fields are starting to take shape again. The barn, well, it'll need a few more hands." Edward smiled knowingly. "You've already done more than most could manage, but let's see if we can't round up some help." As if on cue, Clara arrived with her children, their faces bright despite the smudges of dirt on their cheeks. Behind her came Samuel, carrying a sack of grain and a box of nails. "Thought you might need these," he said, setting them down with a grin. "And I wouldn't mind lending a hand either. It's the least I can do for a warm meal and your company." Anna chuckled, her gratitude genuine. "You're always welcome at my table, Samuel." As the morning wore on, more villagers joined Anna and her small team. Together they worked to repair her barn, the steady thud of hammers and the sound of laughter filling the air. Clara's children scurried about, fetching tools and carrying small planks, their giggles infectious. Even the older villagers, whose bodies were less able but whose spirits were strong, offered guidance and encouragement. During a brief pause, Clara handed Anna a cup of cool water, her eyes soft with admiration. "You've brought everyone together, Anna. It's something special." Anna shook her head modestly. "I didn't do anything but start. Everyone else, they just followed their hearts." Clara smiled knowingly. "And that's exactly why it works." By midday, the barn's frame stood solid once more, the gaps in the roof patched and reinforced. The group stood back to admire their work, sweat gleaming on their brows but pride shining in their eyes. As the sun began its slow descent, the villagers gathered in the square for a shared meal. Tables were lined with simple fare, fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and a stew made from salvaged ingredients. The air buzzed with conversation and laughter, a stark contrast to the somber silence that had lingered just days before. Anna sat with Clara and Edward, watching the children chase each other around the square. Samuel joined them, a wooden flute in hand. He began to play a soft, lilting tune that drifted through the air like a gentle breeze. The music seemed to carry with it a sense of peace, a reminder that even in the wake of hardship, joy could still be found. As the stars began to appear, the villagers lit lanterns and hung them from the trees that framed the square. Their soft glow illuminated the faces of friends and neighbors, each one etched with determination and hope. Anna felt a deep sense of belonging as she looked around. This was her community, her family in every way that mattered. Later, as the gathering began to wind down, Edward approached Anna, his cane tapping softly against the cobblestones. "You've done something remarkable here," he said, his voice low but filled with warmth. "This village has always been strong, but you've reminded us what that strength looks like." Anna smiled, her heart swelling with quiet pride. "I just did what needed to be done." Edward chuckled. "And in doing so, you've shown us all what's possible." That night, as Anna walked back to her farm, the lanterns in the square still casting their warm glow behind her, she felt a profound sense of peace. The barn stood tall against the horizon, a symbol of what could be rebuilt with patience and unity. She paused at the edge of her fields, the faint rustle of newly sprouted leaves carried on the breeze. The land was healing, the village was healing, and in her heart, Anna knew she was healing too. The first signs of growth. Morning came softly over Hearthwick, the sky painted in hues of pale gold and lavender. The village was waking slowly, but Anna was already at her farm, a steaming cup of tea warming her hands as she stood at the edge of her fields. The air carried a faint chill, but the promise of spring was undeniable. She looked out over the neat rows she and the villagers had worked so hard to plant. The soil, dark and rich, held the seeds of their efforts, and more importantly, their hopes. Setting her cup down, Anna knelt and ran her fingers through the earth. It felt alive, ready to give back what had been taken by the storm. As her hand brushed across one of the rows, she noticed something small yet significant, a tiny green shoot breaking through the soil. She stared at it for a long moment, her heart swelling with an unfamiliar mixture of pride and relief. "You're the first," she whispered to the sprout, her voice soft with wonder. "The first of many." That morning, Anna worked with renewed energy. She tilled the earth, checked the saplings Samuel had brought, and cleared away weeds before they could take root. The sun rose higher, and the warmth of its rays soaked into her skin. She felt connected to the land in a way she hadn't since the storm, as though the rhythm of the earth was guiding her forward. By mid-morning, Clara arrived with her children, baskets in hand. "We thought we'd help with the garden today," she said, her smile bright. The children darted off to the vegetable patch, their laughter ringing out as they began pulling weeds and planting seeds. Clara joined Anna in the fields, her hands as capable as her spirit was kind. As they worked, Clara spoke of her late husband, who had once dreamed of expanding their own farm. "He would have loved this," she said, her gaze soft as she looked out over the rows of freshly planted crops. Seeing the land come alive again, being part of something bigger. Anna placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, her voice steady. "You're doing that now, Clara, for him, for your children, and for all of us." The two women shared a quiet moment of understanding before returning to their tasks, their movements synchronized as they nurtured the land. Around noon, Edward arrived with a wagon load of saplings and young plants. Despite his age, he insisted on helping to plant them, his hands steady and sure as he worked. "These will take time," he said, patting the soil around a young apple tree. "But one day, they'll bear fruit that'll remind us of these days, not the storm, but what came after." The thought stayed with Anna as the hours slipped by. The idea of building something lasting, something that would carry the memory of their resilience, filled her with purpose. She looked out over the fields, now dotted with new life, and imagined what they would look like in a few months, in a year. The picture in her mind was one of abundance and peace. In the late afternoon, Samuel arrived with his cart, bringing tools and a surprise, a small flock of chickens. "Thought you could use these," he said with a grin, unloading a crate. "They're a noisy lot, but they'll give you eggs and keep you company." Anna laughed, her heart lightened by his generosity. The children squealed with delight, chasing the chickens as Samuel set up a makeshift coop near the barn. The farm, once battered and empty, now buzzed with activity and promise. As the sun began to set, the villagers who had gathered to help lingered for a simple meal in Anna's kitchen. Fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and a stew simmered on the stove, the scents filling the room and creating a sense of warmth that extended beyond the walls. The group talked and laughed, their bonds growing stronger with every shared story and every word of encouragement. After the meal, Anna stepped outside to find the first stars appearing in the deepening sky. The field stretched out before her, the newly planted rows now a symbol of what they could achieve together. She felt a quiet peace settle over her, as though the land itself was thanking her for her care. Edward joined her on the porch, his cane tapping lightly against the wooden planks. "It's coming along nicely," he said, his voice thoughtful. "The fields, the barn, the people, you've brought it all together." Anna smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's not just me. Everyone's done their part." Edward nodded, his eyes soft with pride. "True enough. But sometimes it takes one voice, one steady hand, to guide the rest." The two stood in companionable silence, the faint sounds of the villagers still chatting inside carrying through the. Anna looked out over her farm, now a patchwork of green shoots and newly planted saplings, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since the storm: hope. As the stars multiplied in the sky, Anna returned inside, the warmth of her home wrapping around her like a familiar embrace. The chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves outside lulled her into a state of calm. That night, as she drifted to sleep, she dreamed of golden fields and laughter echoing across the village, a glimpse of the future they were all building together. Challenges in the fields. The rhythm of life in Hearthwick began to settle into something resembling normalcy, though the memories of the storm lingered in the quiet determination of its people. For Anna, each morning was a step forward, her work on the farm becoming a steady routine. The fields had begun to show more signs of life, tender shoots reaching for the sun and saplings standing taller with each passing day. Yet, nature was rarely predictable, and challenges were never far behind. One morning, as Anna inspected the crops, her stomach sank. The leaves of several young plants were speckled with holes, their edges chewed and frayed. She knelt, running her fingers along the damaged leaves. A closer look revealed the culprits, tiny caterpillars, their plump bodies inching along the stems. She sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face as she considered what to do. Later that day, Clara arrived with her children, the little ones darting off to play in the barn. Clara noticed Anna's furrowed brow and paused. "What's the trouble?" she asked. Anna gestured toward the rows of crops. "It seems we have some uninvited guests. The caterpillars are feasting on the new shoots." Clara crouched to examine the plants, her expression thoughtful. "My mother used to make a mixture with garlic and vinegar to keep pests away. It might help." Anna smiled faintly. "Sounds worth a try. If it worked for her, it's worth seeing if it'll work here." The two women spent the afternoon preparing the mixture, crushing garlic and mixing it with vinegar and water in large buckets. The sharp, tangy smell filled the air as they applied it carefully to the plants, their movements steady and precise. Anna was grateful for Clara's company, her quiet humor and calming presence making the work lighter. As they finished, Edward arrived with a small crate of straw. He set it down with a grunt and leaned on his cane. "For the coop," he said simply. Then, noticing the buckets, he raised an eyebrow. "Pest troubles?" Anna nodded. "Caterpillars." Clara suggested a remedy her mother used. Edward chuckled softly. "Good thinking. The land always tests us, doesn't it?" The three stood for a moment, surveying the fields. Despite the damage, there was still so much promise in the rows of green. The saplings Samuel had brought were thriving, their leaves swaying gently in the breeze. Even the chickens seemed to sense the energy of the place, clucking contentedly as they scratched in the dirt. The next morning, Anna awoke early, the faint light of dawn filtering through her curtains. She pulled on her boots and headed to the fields, eager to see if their efforts had worked. As she approached, she felt a wave of relief. The plants looked healthier, their leaves free of new damage. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding and knelt to inspect the rows more closely. The garlic vinegar mixture seemed to have done its job. Her relief was short-lived. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, their ominous shapes moving swiftly across the sky. By mid-afternoon, the first drops of rain began to fall, quickly escalating into a steady downpour. Anna worked tirelessly to secure the barn, fastening the doors and ensuring the chickens were safely sheltered. She moved to the fields next, covering what she could with tarps and praying the rest would hold. The rain continued into the night, the wind howling like a restless spirit. Inside the farmhouse, Anna sat by the window, watching the storm batter her land. She felt the familiar knot of worry in her chest but pushed it down. There was nothing to do now but wait. When the storm finally passed in the early hours of the morning, Anna ventured outside. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth, and the ground squelched beneath her boots. To her relief, the crops had endured, though the edges of the fields were waterlogged. The saplings, though bent, remained rooted. As the sun rose, casting a warm glow over the farm, Clara and Samuel arrived to check on Anna. Samuel carried a sack of feed for the chickens, while Clara brought a pot of hot tea. Together, they surveyed the damage and began the process of repairing what little had been undone by the storm. "You've built something strong here, Anna," Samuel said as they worked. "The land, the people, it's all connected." Anna paused, leaning on her rake as she looked out over the fields. The storm had tested them again, but they had endured. The crops were growing, the village was healing, and the bonds between its people were stronger than ever. She smiled, a quiet confidence settling in her chest. That evening, as the villagers gathered in the square, Edward spoke of the challenges they had faced and the resilience they had shown. His words were met with nods of agreement and murmurs of pride. Anna felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known before, her connection to the village deepening with each shared hardship and triumph. As the stars appeared one by one in the night sky, Anna returned home, her steps light despite the ache in her muscles. She stood for a moment on the porch, looking out over the farm. The rows of crops stretched before her, a testament to their hard work and determination. In the quiet of the night, she felt a profound peace, knowing that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The spirit of the harvest. The days grew longer, and the fields of Hearthwick slowly transformed into a patchwork of green and gold. The crops flourished under Anna's careful watch, their once tender shoots now standing tall and strong. The saplings Samuel had brought were no longer fragile. Their roots had taken hold, and their leaves whispered softly in the summer breeze. Life had returned to the farm, and with it, a sense of hope that rippled through the village. Anna spent her mornings walking through the fields, her hands brushing against the stalks of wheat. The air was warm and fragrant, filled with the earthy scent of ripening crops and the faint sweetness of wildflowers blooming along the edges of the fields. She paused often to admire the growth, her heart swelling with pride at the sight of what they had accomplished together. One morning, Clara arrived at the farm with her children, their laughter carrying through the air as they raced toward the barn. Clara held a basket of freshly baked bread, the crust golden and crisp. "For breakfast," she said with a smile, handing the basket to Anna. "You've earned it." Anna chuckled. her cheeks flushing with gratitude. "You spoil me, Clara." "Thank you." As they sat on the porch, sharing slices of bread slathered with butter, Clara glanced at the fields and sighed contentedly. "It's hard to believe how far we've come," she said. "Just a few months ago, this place was barely holding on. And now, look at it." Anna nodded, her gaze fixed on the rows of wheat swaying gently in the breeze. "The land needed time, and so did we. But it's stronger now. We're stronger." Later that day, Samuel arrived with Edward, the two men bringing tools to repair the last section of the barn roof. Edward, though slower in his movements, still carried an air of quiet competence, while Samuel's easy humor kept the work light. Together with Anna, they finished the repairs by midday, the barn now standing as a proud symbol of resilience. "Looks good as new," Edward said, stepping back to admire their work. His cane rested against the wall, but his hands were steady as he smoothed a loose shingle. "You've done well here, Anna." "It wasn't just me," Anna replied, her voice warm. "This farm, this village, it's been a group effort." Samuel grinned, brushing sawdust from his hands. "Still, you are the spark, Anna. Don't sell yourself short." That evening, the villagers gathered in the square for a midsummer feast. Long tables were draped with white cloths, and lanterns hung from the trees, casting a warm, golden glow over the gathering. The tables were laden with dishes made from the first harvest, fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and pies filled with berries foraged from the nearby woods. The air buzzed with laughter and conversation, the hardships of the past months, now distant memories. Anna sat among her neighbors, her heart full as she listened to their stories. Clara spoke of her children's newfound love for farming, while Samuel entertained the group with tales from his travels. Edward shared wisdom from his younger days, his deep voice carrying a quiet authority that commanded respect. As the evening wore on, music filled the air. Samuel played his flute, the soft, lilting notes weaving through the night like a gentle breeze. Some of the villagers began to dance, their movements light and joyful, their faces alight with happiness. Anna watched from her seat, her hands wrapped around a mug of cider, the warmth of the moment settling into her bones. Toward the end of the evening, Edward stood and raised his mug, his voice carrying easily over the crowd. "To Hearthwick," he said, his tone firm but filled with pride. "To the land that nurtures us, to the hands that rebuild it, and to the hearts that make this village a home." The villagers cheered, their voices rising into the night like a hymn of gratitude. Anna felt her eyes prick with tears, the weight of the months past lifting from her shoulders. She looked around at the faces of her friends and neighbors, each one etched with the lines of both struggle and triumph. This was her community, her family, and she was proud to stand among them. As the feast began to wind down, Anna walked back to her farm, the lanterns in the square glowing softly behind her. The fields stretched before her, bathed in the silver light of the moon. She paused at the edge of the wheat, her hand brushing gently against the stalks. The harvest was still weeks away, but Anna already felt the abundance in her heart. The farm had been restored, the village had come together, and she had found her place among them. As she stood under the stars, the cool night breeze rustling through the fields, she whispered a quiet promise to the land. "We'll keep growing, together." The night was still as Anna stepped into her farmhouse, the warmth of the hearth welcoming her home. She sat by the fire, her body tired but her spirit light, and let the sounds of the night lull her into a peaceful sleep. Outside, the fields whispered their gratitude, the spirit of the harvest alive in every blade of grass and every leaf on the trees. The harvest begins. The day dawned with a cool breeze that carried the promise of a golden harvest. Hearthwick was alive with quiet anticipation as the villagers prepared for the culmination of months of hard work. For Anna, the morning began as it always did, with the fields. She stood at the edge of her land, the rows of wheat swaying gently in the soft light of dawn. The stalks, now tall and golden, seemed to shimmer with life, their heads heavy with grain. Anna ran her fingers over the wheat, the rough texture of the stalks grounding her. "It's time," she murmured to herself, a smile playing on her lips. She had spent weeks tending to the fields, watching over them as they grew stronger with each passing day. Now they stood ready, a testament to resilience and care. By mid-morning, the villagers began to gather at Anna's farm. Clara arrived first with her children, their laughter ringing out as they darted toward the barn. Edward followed, his cane tapping rhythmically against the ground, accompanied by Samuel, who carried a scythe slung over his shoulder. Others trickled in soon after, each bringing tools, baskets, and a readiness to work. Anna greeted them with a warm smile, her voice steady and welcoming. "Thank you all for coming. This harvest is more than just crops. It's a celebration of what we've done together." The villagers nodded, their faces alight with determination and camaraderie. Together, they spread out across the fields, their movements purposeful and harmonious. The sound of scythes cutting through wheat filled the air, rhythmic and steady, accompanied by the rustling of grain falling into baskets. Anna worked alongside them, her hands deft and strong as she gathered the wheat. The sun climbed higher, its warmth seeping into the earth and the people working upon it. Despite the hard labor, the atmosphere was light, punctuated by laughter and the occasional song. Samuel, ever the entertainer, began a cheerful tune that spread from one worker to the next until the entire group joined in, their voices blending in a joyous chorus. By noon, the first section of the field was cleared, and the group paused to share a simple meal under the shade of the barn. Fresh bread, cheese, and ripe fruit were passed around, the flavors heightened by the satisfaction of their progress. As they ate, Clara's children ran between the rows, their playful shouts echoing across the farm. Edward leaned against a wooden post, his weathered face thoughtful as he watched the scene. "This," he said, gesturing to the group, "is what makes Hearthwick strong. Not the land alone, but the people who tend to it." Anna nodded, her gaze sweeping over the group. "It's what makes this home." After the break, the work resumed with renewed energy. The villagers moved as one, their efforts seamless and efficient. As the hours passed, the fields slowly transformed. The once standing wheat now stacked neatly in bundles, ready to be threshed. The golden hue of the fields gave way to the deep, rich tones of the soil beneath, a reminder of the endless cycle of life and renewal. As evening approached, the last bundle was gathered, and a cheer erupted from the group. They stood together, their faces flushed with exertion, but their eyes bright with pride. The work was done, and the harvest was complete. Anna felt a swell of gratitude as she looked at the gathered villagers. "You've all given so much," she said, her voice carrying easily over the quiet. "This isn't just a harvest, it's proof of what we can achieve together. Thank you from the bottom of my heart." The villagers responded with applause, their voices rising in a shared celebration of their success. The group lingered in the fading light, their laughter and conversation a balm after the long day's work. As the stars began to appear, Samuel lit a small fire near the barn, its warm glow drawing the villagers closer. They shared stories and songs, their voices mingling with the crackle of the flames. Anna sat beside Clara, her heart full as she listened to Edward recount a tale from his youth, his deep voice weaving a picture of a time long past. Later, as the group began to disperse, Anna stood at the edge of the fields, now quiet and bare under the moonlight. The land, though harvested, still felt alive, its promise of renewal as steadfast as ever. She closed her eyes and let the cool night breeze wash over her, carrying with it the whispers of the earth. Inside the farmhouse, Anna lit a single candle and sat by the window, her gaze drifting over the darkened fields. The harvest was done, but the work of life continued. She thought of the seeds they would plant in the coming weeks, the crops that would grow anew, and the seasons that would follow. The cycle was unending, yet each turn of it brought something new, something meaningful. As the candle flickered softly, Anna felt a deep sense of peace. The storm had tested them, but it had also revealed their strength. The land had healed, the village had thrived, and together they had created something lasting. That night, as Anna lay in bed, the sounds of the village quiet around her, she dreamed of golden fields stretching to the horizon, their heads bowing gently under the weight of the sun. It was a vision of abundance, of resilience, and of the unbreakable spirit that defined Hearthwick. A season of gratitude. The days following the harvest were filled with quiet satisfaction. The fields, now bare, seemed to rest under the soft autumn sun, their work complete for the season. In the village of Hearthwick, a sense of peace settled over the people, their efforts rewarded with storerooms full of grain and barns brimming with supplies. The storm that had once brought so much destruction felt like a distant memory, replaced by the bonds forged through their shared perseverance. Anna stood in her kitchen early one morning, her hands busy kneading dough for a loaf of bread. The rhythmic motion brought her comfort, grounding her as she reflected on the past months. The land had healed, the farm was thriving, and the village had grown stronger than ever. It was a transformation she hadn't dared to hope for in the days after the storm. But now, as she looked out the window at the golden morning light, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. That afternoon, the villagers gathered in the square for the annual Harvest Festival, a tradition that had been postponed due to the storm, but now felt more meaningful than ever. Long tables were set up beneath the trees, their branches adorned with ribbons and lanterns. The tables overflowed with the bounty of their efforts, baskets of apples and pears, loaves of bread, and steaming dishes prepared with care. The air was alive with laughter and the hum of conversations, the hardships of the past giving way to celebration. Anna arrived with a basket of fresh bread and a jar of honey from Samuel's bees, a smile spreading across her face as she was greeted warmly by her neighbors. Clara waved her over to a table where her children were already digging into slices of pie, their faces sticky with fruit and sugar. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Clara said, her eyes sweeping over the scene. "To think, just a few months ago, we were wondering if we'd make it through." Anna nodded, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "We did more than make it through. We built something stronger." Edward joined them, his cane tapping against the cobblestones as he approached. "And we'll keep building," he said, his voice steady. "This village has weathered storms before, and it will again. What matters is that we stand together." As the afternoon gave way to evening, Samuel began playing his flute, the soft, lilting melody weaving through the gathering like a thread of gold. Villagers joined in with singing, their voices rising in harmony under the glow of the lanterns. Children danced in circles, their laughter carrying on the cool breeze. The atmosphere was one of joy, a celebration not just of the harvest, but of the spirit that had brought them to this moment. Anna found herself sitting with Edward and Clara, a mug of cider warming her hands as she watched the festivities unfold. She felt a deep sense of belonging, a connection to the land and the people who called Hearthwick home. These were her neighbors, her friends, her family in every way that mattered. As the stars began to fill the sky, Edward raised his mug once more, his voice carrying easily over the crowd. "To the harvest," he said, his tone firm but warm, "and to the people who made it possible. May this season remind us of our strength, our resilience, and the beauty of coming together." The villagers raised their mugs in unison, their voices ringing out in a cheer that echoed across the square. Anna felt her eyes prick with tears, her heart full as she joined in the toast. Later, as the gathering began to wind down, Anna walked back to her farm under the light of the moon. The field stretched before her, quiet and peaceful, their work complete for now. She paused at the edge of the land, her hand brushing against the dry stalks of wheat left behind. The earth felt alive beneath her feet, a reminder that even in rest, it was preparing for what would come next. Inside the farmhouse, Anna lit a single candle and sat by the window, her gaze drifting over the darkened fields. The storm had tested them all, but it had also revealed their strength. The land had healed, the village had flourished, and she had found her place among them. In the flickering glow of the candlelight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, her heart brimming with gratitude for the journey they had shared. As she climbed into bed, the soft rustle of the breeze outside lulled her into a peaceful sleep. In her dreams, she saw the fields in full bloom once more, golden and endless under the summer sun. It was a vision of abundance, of unity, and of the unbreakable spirit that defined Hearthwick. It was not just a season of harvest, it was a season of hope. Thank you for joining us on Story Planet for the Harvest of Serenity. We hope this heartwarming tale of resilience, unity, and renewal brought you peace and comfort. If you felt immersed in the golden fields of Hearthwick and the quiet strength of its people, consider giving a thumbs up. Share the story with friends and family who might need a moment of calm. And if you haven't yet, subscribe for daily relaxing tales to help you unwind. Wishing you a peaceful night and sweet dreams.